Welcome to the Virulent Vortex, a podcast in which we discuss infectious diseases across scales, from molecules and pathogens to populations and pandemics and everything in between. My name is Jaap de Rode. I'm a professor of biology here at Emory University, and today with me is Ani Deshpande, who is a graduate student in the epidemiology program here at the Rollins School of Public Health. Ani, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jaap.
So Ani, you're interested in infectious diseases and the effects of climate change on infectious diseases. Now, when we think about that connection, we often think about vector-borne diseases such as malaria that are transmitted by mosquitoes, and it gets warmer, the mosquitoes can go places where they're not now. Is that what you're doing, or are you doing something else?
Yeah, I decided to look outside the box a little bit. There's a lot of emphasis on waterborne and vector-borne diseases, as you just said, but I'm more interested in diseases that are not traditionally thought of as linked to climate change, such as vaccine-preventable diseases, such as rotavirus and pneumonia, and linking them back to climate change. In addition to diseases that not as many people might have heard of, such as valley fever, that we have right here in the United States, caused by fungus.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few of those in detail.
Okay.
And so rotavirus you mentioned. So this is a virus that causes diarrhea.
Yeah.
And so what is the link to climate change there?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because rotavirus is only transmitted between people. There's some research articles suggesting some animal reservoirs of non-human rotaviruses, but really it's traditionally thought of transmitted between children.
Okay.
So what would be the climate link? Well, what I'm really looking at is how is the structure of the population itself changing as climate changes? So as the climate is expected to change, resources are expected to get more scarce in certain areas that will cause people to move about and come into contact with each other in changing ways. And I want to see how that has a ripple effect on these vaccine-preventable diseases.
So if you were to predict, say, one place on Earth where you think that global warming or the effects of climate change through droughts or something are going to have a real big impact on rotavirus, where would it be?
If I knew the exact answer, I wouldn't need to do my dissertation. But East Africa is particularly vulnerable to drought-related effects, especially the Horn of Africa. So there's a great initiative called the Africa Mobility Initiative, as well as some reports by the World Bank that have really highlighted East Africa as a possible location where these migration events are supposed to happen.
Yeah. So this is basically people leaving areas that are too dry and then going to other places. And then maybe you get more interactions between people, higher densities.
Exactly.
And then you predict more rotavirus because people are interacting more closely.
So in East Africa, climate change is supposed to influence the movement of these populations into these urban centers. Yeah. And that's on top of ongoing trends of growing urban centers in these areas. So there might be a compound effect.
And so you mentioned some other diseases. One of the ones I think was a fungal disease. So tell us about that.
It's a really interesting pathogen. It's a fungal disease, and the pathogen is called coccidioides. And the disease is much easier to pronounce, called valley fever, named after the Central Valley in California. And it's a soil-borne fungus where once it infects a human, it's a dead-end host. So it's actually a non-contagious infectious disease.
Okay, so a dead-end host is a host that normally when you think about a pathogen, it infects a host, and that host can transmit it to someone else. But you're saying humans cannot do that. So we get the fungus, but the fungus can go anywhere.
Exactly. They're extremely rare cases, but by and large, if you get infected, you're not going to infect someone else through contact. Why this is important is because it's extremely environmentally influenced. So this fungus lives in the soil in the arid regions of the American Southwest. And there are some theories around the ecology of this fungus, that it's a cycle of potentially bloom and grow and followed by dispersal. Yeah. So in wet season, it might grow in the soil. Then in a dry season, this fungus the hyphae might break down and it might disperse and people might breathe them in.
Okay.
And the reason it's really critical is the fungus causes disease in a pretty small proportion. But especially in the areas such as Arizona and parts of California, the population is on the older side. And so public health agencies have estimated that about 30% of pneumonias in these areas are actually attributable to this fungus.
So interesting. So this fungus doesn't make mushrooms?
I haven't really tried to make a sauce out of it yet, but no mushrooms that I know of.
Okay, so it's more like it's mycelium.
Exactly.
So it's this tissue of the fungus in the soil, and when it breaks up, you can breathe it in.
Exactly.
And then it can start growing inside.
Exactly. And if you have conditions that make you immunocompromised, whether it's diabetes or if you're HIV positive, it might cause you to have a higher susceptibility of that fungus spreading. There might be growing interest. I don't know if you've seen The Last of Us. It actually features an epidemiologist where they're concerned about this fungus that starts growing inside humans because the fungus adapts to internal body temperatures. And that leads to a mass infection and zombies and drama.
Okay.
So people who are interested in fungal-borne diseases, and the extreme worst scenario, they might check it out.
All right. So this is cool for a Halloween movie.
Exactly.
This is not what you research.
No, not exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, so what does it normally infect? Or does it just live in the soil and
it just lives in the soil usually.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is we're pairing the surveillance data with climate models that have been produced and creating these projections of where in the US this fungus can habitate. And what we're seeing is as the climate becomes more arid in the American West, the regions are not just confined to the American Southwest, but it's supposed to spread into the Four Corners region and all the way north to southern Montana. So if climate change is not mitigated, the amount of geography that this fungus can live in can really grow dramatically.
I see. Okay, so with the climate change, we expect this fungus to maybe start causing more of these cases of pneumonia. And so with that in mind, so both your work on the viruses that we just talked about and now the fungus, so you see these patterns. So what can we learn from them in terms of improving health for people?
Right. So I'm building these models as they're not trying to exactly predict the future, but like you said, help guide people potentially prepare for what's coming.
Yeah.
So in the case of this fungus, there's it's not a fungus that comes to mind when people think of pneumonia. Most people think of the bacteria Streptococcus. So if we can show that, actually in the Four Corners region where if a patient comes in with pneumonia and most people aren't thinking about this fungus, maybe they should test for this fungus before it gets worse.
And it's important to do that because based on what is causing the pneumonia requires different treatments.
Exactly. Pneumonia is just a syndrome. So it can be caused by a virus where they might not do anything, a bacteria where you have antibiotics, or this fungus where I'm not a doctor, but they have a different treatment regimen for it.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm really motivated by just expanding what we think of as climate impacts to try to capture as many of the effects as possible to paint a more holistic story of human health and how it's affected by climate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ani, this was wonderful. Thank you
likewise.
so much for joining us on the show. I learned so much about diseases that I didn't know were associated with climate change.
Great. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for watching.